Okay, so today we have Fallon Morell that I'll be interviewing. Sally needs no introduction, but just for conversation's sake, Fallon Morell is the founding president of the Weston A Foundation and the author and co-author of numerous books on traditional diets. And in particular, I'd like to talk to Sally about her newest book, Nourishing Diets: How Paleo, Ancestral, and Traditional Peoples Really Ate. Sally, thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy day to chat with me today about your new book.
You're welcome.
So I typically I would ramble on and kind of chit chat for a little bit to get folks to tell me about your story, how you got into this stuff. But because you're so well known and there's so much information that you have on the internet, I'm just going to refer people to the incredible amount of work that is available on Weston A Price and in your books in the show notes below. And with your permission, I'd just like to dig right into this, the topic of your book for today.
Okay, just let me mention the best place I like to send people to is my blog, which is nourishingtraditions.com.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. That'll be the first link I have in the show notes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so the opening line of your newest book, Nourishing Diets, is a quote from Dr. Weston A Price, and that quote blew me away. I don't know how I have never thought of this before, but he said the most universal disease in the world is tooth decay, and I was just dumbfounded by that because everybody has it basically. And
yeah,
so I guess basically I'm just wondering, what would you say that he said that back in the 1930s? Would you say that this is still the case today? Is it still the most universal disease in the world?
Well, I would say yes. Now, most people don't think of tooth decay as a disease, do they?
No, they don't.
They just think of it as just kind of an annoyance. And I think the reason we can do that is because we have dentists and very skilled dentists. And if we didn't have dentists, this disease of tooth decay would be impacting us all in a very painful way all the time.
Yeah.
But we do have dentists, and dentists are very good at repairing the damage. But yes, I think probably 95% of people living in the modern world have at least one or more cavities. And that is a disease. It's a sign of poor nutrition. It's a sign that things aren't right in the body. Now, I say 95%, but what's interesting is that the children brought up on our diet, following our principles, what we call the wise traditions principles, tend not to have tooth decay. My grandsons, I have 4 grandsons, none of them has tooth decay, which is amazing because I had tooth decay and my kids had a little tooth decay, less than me, but my grandsons have none. So it's something that can be completely prevented.
Totally. Well, and it's amazing considering that, when Dr. Weston A Price, first started going to these so-called, primitive cultures in the early 1920s and 30s, he found tooth decay at less than 1% in some of these other cultures.
Yeah, and in Africa, he found 6 tribes with no tooth decay in any member of the tribe. He was just amazed at that. And of course, the teeth are a part of the body, inside the body, that we can see. And, we can't see much else. And he used the teeth as a kind of barometer or indicator of how good the rest of the health was. And, I say that for most of us, tooth decay is just an inconvenience, but actually, one of the fastest growing fields in medicine is pediatric dentistry.
Yeah. And
we are getting reports of children with all of their teeth coming in rotten. Now, this is more than just an inconvenience. This is very, very serious.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had tons of cavities growing up, and I also had braces and
me too.
4 of my brothers and sisters had braces, but my parents didn't, and they have excellent teeth, and my grandparents didn't either. And
my dad used to sit at the table and say, "I just don't understand it. your mom and I have perfect teeth and perfect eyesight. Why do you kids all need braces and glasses?
Yeah.
And I guess that question just sunk into my psyche. And I have spent the last 20 years trying to tell people why, you know.
Yeah. I mean, you know, when I first came across your work, probably 5 or 6 years ago, I was I was born and raised on a mixed organic farm, and you know, we ate very, very well. But my parents, you know, wanting to give, you know, their children the absolute best life they could, and you know, they bought into the kind of health propaganda at the time, which, you know, don't, like, when I was first born, we had a milk cow, and you know, we had raw milk every day. And by the time I was 5 or 6, we actually we got rid of the milk cow. We switched to soy milk, almond milk, rice milk, uh, tons of
Okay.
tons of vitamins, and you know, the now, you know, it's 10, 15 years later, and as kids I hated it. We hated soy milk. We hated eating it. Like, all I wanted was to have real milk on my cereal, because I remember it was when I was a kid. And but my mom at the time thought that was what was best for her children. And now, I mean, we've kind of come full circle. We're back on the proper diet that we should be eating. And you know, the personal benefits that we've seen in our life has been incredible. And you know, I look back and it's dumbfounding how we got to where we were. And after reading your book, I just I started asking myself, is like, how did we get to where we were? And in you talk a little bit about, you know, where kind of the insidious origins of our iconic food pyramid came from. Yeah, could you just kind of fill us in on a bit of the background story of how we got from the incredibly healthy primitive populations of the world everywhere, where they're eating the biologically appropriate diet for their climatic and geographic context, to where we are now?
Well, I'm not an expert on the details, but my understanding is that the USDA, there was actually some kind of congressional law direct USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, to look into this question: what is a healthy diet? And believe it or not, the dietitians of the time, and we're talking before World War II, they thought that America had a pretty good diet. Americans were quite healthy. They had good teeth, tall and strong. The only exception to that was the rural South, where people were quite poor and living mainly on corn.
Yeah.
And they already knew the solution to that. They went out and got chickens and milk cows for these people, and that solved the problem. But what happened was that people with agendas got involved in this question. The original recommendations for the food pyramid, I believe, were, you know, lots of fruits and vegetables, meat, fats, and everything. And they took her recommendations, and what they came back with was this pyramid that was very heavy in the carbs. And the woman who had formulated all this said, "Hey, what happened to my recommendations?" And they gave all kinds of lame excuses, like, you know, people can't afford the vegetables, people won't eat the vegetables. But what happened is that what was started out to be something that was supposed to be helpful to the population became a marketing tool.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we had the application of industrial processes on food. And I like to say, you know, I'm not against industry. We need industry. Industry's made our lives so much easier and more comfortable. And, you know, I like electricity. I like airplanes, cars, computers. I like all those things. But it is inappropriate to apply these heavy-handed industrial processes onto food.
Yeah.
We need a different system for food. We need artisan, low tech. I'm not against technology for food, but it needs to be low tech and always in mind of increasing the nutrient value of the food. But what happened was we got the big boys, big rough industry applied to food production. And that resulted in food that was less nourishing. And so what happens is each generation becomes weaker. And the current generation of children is really suffering from these mistakes that we've made.
Absolutely. And I mean, in your book, you talk about, I'm getting a bit of feedback from your end there. I'm not sure. Did you?
You're okay.
Yeah. Not sure why it's.
You're fine.
Okay. So in your book, you talk about Ancestral keys and kind of the maybe I read into a bit too much, but it seemed like he had an instrumental role in the kind of formulation of the food pyramid. And I was just blown away at your kind of diagnosis of where he formulated the theory and the circumstances of where that theory goes, and all of the red flags that came up for him, and continue to come up for everyone who supports that diet. How does that kind of story tie into?
So Ancestral keys, I don't think Ancestral keys had much to do with the actual food pyramid.
Okay.
But he's the one that began to promote the Mediterranean diet and claiming that the Mediterranean diet followed the food pyramid guidelines. In other words, it's very low in fat and very high in carbohydrates. Now, Ancestral Keys, he was a postgraduate student in London, and he and his wife were living in this flat that was very hard to heat. So they were very cold. And he got this opportunity to go to Italy in the winter. And he thought this was a great idea. So they really liked sunny Italy. They really loved it there. And they wanted to keep coming back. So he made sure that happened. And all the conferences he held were in Italy. Well, the first time he went was right after the war. And Italians were pretty much starving at that time. They didn't have the butter they wanted. They were out of cheese. There wasn't much meat. And so they were living on a kind of high carb diet, which is a poverty diet, right? And he concluded that this was the regular, healthy Mediterranean diet. Now, I've lived in the Mediterranean. I lived in Montpellier, which is as Mediterranean as you can get. It's right on the Mediterranean, okay? I lived with a French family, and I want to tell you, I didn't see many vegetables when I lived with them. We'd have salads, and in season we had strawberries.
Yeah.
The vegetables were too expensive for this family. What we did have was charcuterie. We had ham and pâté, and then for dinner we'd have a chicken or a roast that was larded. And then we have dessert from the pastry shop, so there were quite a few carbs on this diet, but there was lots and lots of fat, lots of dairy products, lots of organ meats, and some bread, of course, white bread. So the diet was not at all what he says. And at the end of his life, he was bemoaning. He said, the Italians are no longer eating their traditional diet. Oh, isn't it a shame? They have too much fat in their diet, and they're eating too much ice cream. To laugh, because ice cream was an Italian invention, back in the 1500s, Italians were eating ice cream. I think I made it kind of humorous, the section on the Mediterranean diet.
Definitely.
And fun to him because, and he was very pompous and, took himself very serious.
And it's funny, just after I just finished your book, and then a friend of mine, I was telling her about your book, and particularly Ancestral Keys, and there was actually a radio special on CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is kind of our radio station up here. And they were doing a series on Ancestral Keys and saturated fats. And apparently when he also went to, when he was in Italy, it was, like you said, it was after the war, but it was also during Lent.
Yes, that's right. One of the times he was there was during Lent. And then I also bring up another study in Spain. So these researchers go out to Spain, and they're really gung-ho about the Mediterranean diet. And they get there and they do diet surveys of adolescents in Spain, and they're shocked because they're not eating any vegetables. They're hardly eating any carbs. All they eat is sausage. And the researchers are so dismayed that the young people in Spain don't know what their diet is. And they're going to educate the parents. This is what it basically comes out. We're going to harangue and harass and propagandize the parents so that they feed vegetables to these kids. In Italy, Ansel Keys was going to harangue and proselytize the children to go home and tell their parents how they should be eating.
Yeah. Well, I remember doing the same thing when I was a kid in school. Is like I brought home pamphlets and colored photos of the pyramid that we had to hang up on the fridge. And I mean, it's just you can look at it, whether it's an accident or there was, some, directed, insidious motivations behind this stuff by industry, and it's really irrelevant at this point. I mean, in your book and many others has laid out the shaky foundations that our current food system is based on, and we're getting the feedback now, as you said, from the last 4 or 5 generations are just declining in their health, and all these other illnesses are popping up. Do you see that trends are starting to shift? Do you think we're over the hump, or do we still have a bunch of work left to do to straighten out our kind of brainwashing when it comes to diet?
Well, we have a huge amount of work left to do, but at the same time, the people have to be ready.
Yeah.
I mean, it has to be an individual realization. We were wrong. I need to change the way I eat. It's my responsibility. And when people come, when that light bulb goes off, we want to be there for them with our information, with our chapter leaders all over the world, with our sources to good food. But you can't just talk to people about this if they're not ready. Food is a very sensitive subject. And I was asked once to speak to some Southern ladies at a French restaurant, and they were very insulted by what I said, and it's just because basically what you're saying is you brought up your kids wrong.
Yeah,
and it's a very difficult message, and I don't like to be the one carrying that message. What I like to say is, oh, you've come to this realization that something's got to change. Can I help you? But I don't want to be, you've done it wrong. I'm bashing you over the head. So, but what I see happening, I call it the natural selection of the wise, because nature's way is natural selection. Yeah. And what's happening, we're now on our 4th generation of processed food in this country. Mm-hmm. And Pottinger, with his studies with Pottinger's cats, he found that by the 4th generation on food inappropriate to cats, there was no more reproduction. And so the people who continue to eat this way, it sounds like a very cruel thing to say, but this is how nature handles these things. Yeah. They will die out. They will not have offspring. And we see this already with, a quarter of our couples infertile, probably much higher number than that. Yeah. At the same time, we actually have the knowledge today and the resources today to eat better than we've ever eaten. Yeah. And the people who are choosing this, they will survive. They will have healthy offspring. And that's why I call it the natural selection of the wise. And the thing I like to point out is that this diet is not what you call health food. I mean, it's not the awful restrictive, whole grain, low fat, lots of vegetables diet that we were told we had to eat to be healthy. And most people say, screw you. I'd rather just enjoy my food than have to eat all that horrible stuff in order to add a few years of life to my human carcass, Our diet includes everything. You can have all the butter you want. It includes dairy products, includes meat, fats, salt. You need salt. Mm-hmm. We have soft drinks in our diet, delicious, healthy soft drinks. You can have desserts on our diet. You can have grains on our diet. Nothing is excluded in our diet. Mm-hmm. What's different is that you're paying attention to how the food was grown, prepared, and prepared.
Yeah, which I mean is so simple, yet it's revolutionary when it comes to the hundreds of other diets that that are out there that are everything that your diet isn't, which is they're restrictive, they're dogmatic,
Yes.
and
Yes.
they change like the wind. and
And they make unrealistic promises too. I mean, I don't make huge promises about our diet. It takes a while.
Yeah.
We've seen some remarkable things happen, but you've been on industrial food for 4 generations. It takes a while to return to health.
Yeah, which is one of the questions I actually wanted to chat with you about is like, what is kind of an average timeline that people can expect before they start to feel or see some kind of results? Because I know I hear a lot of I myself went vegetarian and vegan for a while because I bought into all the propaganda, and I did my own research, and I watched videos about the China study and all this other garbage that but I was so convinced that was the right thing to do, and so I switched. But within a few, like I did that for about a year, I could feel and see the deleterious effects of that on me. But I know other people that have done it for 25 years until the light kicks in, and other people still who when they first switch over, they'll see these really, they feel better, they have more energy, and then like I said, 20 years later they crash. So what are some of the timelines folks can see before some of they start to build up their their B12 and get more of these enzymes and things back in their diet so that they can start to feel kind of whole again?
Well, everyone's different, and I hear all kinds of stories. The most remarkable one recently was a woman came up to me at a conference, and she said that she had suffered from irritable bowel syndrome for 20 years, and she had tried literally everything short of surgery. She just didn't want to do the surgery. And she heard about us, and she started to eat sauerkraut, raw sauerkraut. Within 2 weeks, she had no more irritable bowel syndrome. It was completely gone. So this was just a food she took.
Yeah.
There are remarkable stories like that. I know that I had some night vision problems, some floater problems in my eyes, and when I started to take a type of cod liver oil, the fermented cod liver oil, they cleared up within a week. Both of those things within a week.
Wow.
But at the same time, if you are starting out really sick, these things take longer. I know that former vegans, vegetarians usually feel better right away when they get back on the meat foods. But if you have stuck with this for a long, long time, the B12 damage can be irreversible. So everyone's going to respond differently. Another thing I find commonly, we're saying you need fats, you need these animal fats, you can have all you want. But some people, they've been on low fat for so long, it's very difficult to start digesting fats again.
Yeah.
They're not making enough bile to digest fats. Their cholesterol levels are too low to make enough bile. We make bile out of cholesterol. So they have to very gradually build up the fats in those circumstances.
Yeah. And I've even noticed that for myself. Like I've been, really committed to this diet for the last 3 or 4 years now. And the amount of fat that I've been able to eat in my diet has steadily increased, and now to the point some of the effects that I've noticed is I don't get hungry anymore.
Yes, right.
I'm only eating 2 meals a day now as opposed to eating 3, and not because I'm starving myself or it's something I'm giving up. It's just I'm not hungry anymore. I have 2 big meals that are really high in fat, and I work 16, 18-hour days in the summertime, and physical labor. It's just amazing. And I've had the same thing. A lot of our customers are, kind of ex-vegans, ex-vegetarians, and they say the same thing. Once they can have 1 pork chop for breakfast, and it does them all day. Whereas before they were snacking on nuts and granola bars and fruit.
Yes, exactly. They're always hungry. I'm the same. I have 2 meals. Most days I just eat 2 meals.
Yeah.
Sometimes I eat 3, but and those are meals I really enjoy. They're greasy and good, and I enjoy my soft bacon in the morning and the scrambled eggs with extra yolks or the oatmeal, soaked oatmeal with 4 or 5 tablespoons of butter on it,
Mm-hmm.
and you really enjoy that meal. You're satisfied, and then you stop thinking about food because you are so satisfied, and you go ahead and do your work, and you're not hungry. You don't. Going to the vending machine to get a candy bar doesn't even cross your mind.
No.
You're too busy. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No. Okay, so coming back a bit more to the book, the before even the first line of your book starts, there's kind of an introduction or by who was the doctor that did the introduction?
Dr. Cowan. Yes,
Dr. Cowan. Yeah,
we've been colleagues many years. Yes. Uh-huh.
He said that he had 2 responses to your book. One was expected, one was unexpected. And the expected was that he was just like to hear the incredible health and vitality and the simplicity and the beauty of these landscapes and the diets that all these traditional peoples were eating from all around the world. I mean, you cover North America, South America, the far north, Africa, the Mediterranean, Japan, China, like it's everywhere. You really cover
Australia.
Australia.
South.
You really cover all your bases, and just to see how they're eating and how healthy they were is just it's just amazing. But then the second half of that was that he the unexpected thing that he felt was a profound sense of loss and a sadness at that what we had missed. And when I finished the book, I was felt exactly the same way. There was a lot of stuff that I knew from doing research and following your guys' work for the last couple of years, but the way you put it together and the stories and it blew me away. And even still today, everybody I talk to, I'm rambling about this book and about how how our world used to be in terms of the human health, but also the planetary health. And so I guess that my question is you have settler accounts from North America from the late 1400s, in Australia, it's from the 1700s, about how these landscapes were park-like settings, dripping with animals, diverse and flora and fauna life. The people,
beautiful. They were beautiful.
The people were strong, tall, handsome, living to 100+ years. It wasn't all rosy, like you mentioned, which I really think is important too, to mention the tribal aspect, and the quality of life for the women was generally poorer than the men because a lot of the work befell them. But all in all, they were an incredibly healthy, thriving society. And now we look at what our world looks like today with, we're in the 6th largest extinction event since the last asteroid hit us. And this one is entirely anthropocentric. We've got peak oil, peak energy, peak phosphorus. The health of our, people and children is in ruins. And it's just that when you contrast those 2 things together, in one of the lines in your book, you say that the indigenous people all over the world were managing their land in a way similar to kind of like modern permaculture, which is one of the things that I'm trained in and what we use on our farm. And so I guess, first off, do you think it's possible for us to get back to that kind of a global kind of paradise or Eden? And what are the steps to that, if it is possible?
Yeah. Well, and you say a global paradise or Eden, and the explorers and anthropologists who first went to these places couldn't help but use those words because people were so beautiful, smiling. I mean, imagine coming into a village where everyone is perfectly formed and has beautiful white teeth, and they're all smiling and happy, but they are a tribe. They have a group energy, so to speak. group consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the parable of the prodigal son is really what we need to think of here. So the prodigal son leaves the father, he leaves the paradise,
Mm-hmm.
and goes out to seek his own way. And this is a very important part of our spiritual evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And he ends up feeding pigs the husks, right? So he's totally immersed in matter. That's what feeding the pigs means. And he's eating the husks. So he's eating, white bread and soy milk, right? So he's eating the husks. And then he says, the angels in my Father's house are better off than I am here. I will arise and return to my Father. And that is so important, that word I, because all of a sudden he has an individual consciousness. And this whole voyage and of suffering, and it's been suffering.
Yeah.
Is the purpose is to develop the I. And then once we have that I, we can individually go back to eating the right way, taking care of our landscapes and so forth. Let's face it, the primitive people, there was no choice in this.
Yeah.
They didn't say, I would like to have a pork chop this morning. They had to eat whatever was, there was no choice. They didn't have to think about what went in their mouths. And we today, if we want to regain that state of good health, we have to think about every morsel that we eat. So we have to have that I consciousness. So I'm getting a little bit esoteric here, but
no, that's perfect.
It's all part of the plan. It's all part of the plan, and we should feel sad. We should feel this sense of loss, because only by feeling that way will we take the steps that we need to reverse it.
Huh. That is amazing, and it really fits into my own personal beliefs as well. And one of the things that we talk a lot about in the courses, the permaculture courses that we teach, is this idea of the successional cycle, or the process that an ecosystem or a community goes of evolution that a community goes through over a long period of time. And so you imagine there's a disturbance event. You have Eden. It's a climax forest.
Yeah.
There's a disturbance event, and you have to work your way back up to that climax forest. And at different stages, there's kind of some unsavory characters in there. Like, after this disturbance, there's a lot of weeds that are prickly and thorny, and they have toxic things that they ooze out on you when you touch them, and it has to stem from more complex, and eventually you get back to the climax ecosystem. But there's that process of growth, and different stages have to occur. Like if you try to plant an apple tree in a lawn, which is a very early successional ecosystem, it's not going to do very well. First, you have to create the conditions for that apple tree or that forest garden to thrive. And sometimes it takes a long time, but if you try to force function the climax ecosystem or the Eden, it can be a whole bunch of work. And so I find that analogy very analogous to our own kind of, like you said, as you said, spiritual development, and even the community dynamics that exist today in the work that my parents had to do, and when they made the transition to organic agriculture 30 years ago, and it's unbelievable what they had to go through compared to how easy it is for me now to have these conversations about organic, and spraying chemicals on your food is a bad thing.
Well, and we have Dr. Tom Cowan often says it's really easy, actually. It's not hard. And we have these choices today. I mean, look at the progress we've made with raw milk. Now, I know it's difficult in Canada, but in the United States, you can pretty much get raw milk anywhere today.
Yeah.
And one way or another, hook or crook, you can get raw milk. And that is a huge improvement. We can get, natural pastured eggs. We can get naturally raised beef and other meats. we can get these things. And one of the things that makes it possible is the internet, which we didn't have before. So here's a technology that is actually going to make small work where it didn't before.
Yeah.
So we're, you know, I'm actually a great believer in technology. It's just we have to use it properly. And it's just like every bit of food that you eat, you have to think about. Every technology that you use, you have to think about. Do I choose this technology or don't? I know there's a technology of zapping the genes in our plants. I just don't think this is a very good technology to use.
Yeah.
So it has to be the individual choices that each one of us makes. And then eventually, because of the natural selection of the wise, you know, everyone will be making it. So I'm the eternal optimist. I believe in God, and I believe in man, and man. I have great faith in mankind.
That's all the saturated fats that you're getting that makes you so happy.
Yeah, right. It does. Yeah, right. I was reading something in the National Enquirer of all places about, I've got to contact this doctor who was saying that people who are very aware and very alert, they need more salt than others because you need the sodium and chloride for your brain to work. And all this low salt has kind of just dumbed down the population. We have pregnant women avoiding salt. There's no salt in baby food. Yeah. And mothers are told not to give their children salt. And that has been a terrible, terrible thing with terrible consequences.
Definitely. I mean, and one of the things that you, you know, your diet you prescribe is that, you know, an average adult person needs one and a half teaspoons of salt per day, which is,
and some people need more. Yeah.
And I mean, you know, when I look at my own diet, I think that's probably about what I'm eating. But to think about eating that much in one is, and especially how salt phobic people are. I come back to this all the time, and it's not just in this area. I mean, it's in agriculture, it's in an education system. It's the same pattern repeats itself at a bunch of different levels of our society. But honestly, everything that we've been taught is wrong.
Yeah. I think that's a very good assumption. If the government's telling you to do something, it's wrong. I remember once reading an article about beekeeping, and the guy said, absolutely 100% about what USDA tells you about beekeeping is wrong.
Yeah.
100%. So, I think that's a very good way to start is that assumption. And I was actually sort of like that even as a child. My parents did not know what to do with me. I mean, if I was told something, I was going to argue against it. So I think it's a very good way to be. But yes, and we each need to, you know, do this on our own. And by the way, and I say this in the book, one of the benefits of living in modern society is the ready access to salt. Yeah. And salt was a scarce commodity in the old days. Look at for example, the American Indians. They had salt traders. They had special families that traded salt all over the continent. And if something happened, if they were killed or if they couldn't get to your little village, you ran out of salt. Yeah. And so it was really a very precarious situation. And I often wonder if, you know, the Indians, there was a tremendous reduction in their population, and this is blamed on smallpox. And of course, most of it was smallpox. But I often wonder whether there was something that happened that reduced their access to salt and made them more vulnerable. I've never read that.
That's interesting. Yeah. No, it's funny. That was one of the questions I didn't have down here, but I'm one of the books you reference in your book is 1491. What North America looked like prior to Columbus, and you know, I'm in my mind, I'm contrasting your book and like the health of these people and how they were so resistant to disease, and how you reference one doctor who you know, coming to the conclusion, he was a Western doctor working in a traditional settlement up in the Inuit communities, and he came to the conclusion that if somebody came down with tuberculosis, kind of eating the modern diet, as opposed to leaving them in the hospital and trying to cure them, the best thing was for them to go back out on the ice and to start eating seal fat again. And just like that, like, so there's that natural vibrancy and that health. And then you contrast that with some of the things that this fellow is saying in this book is that, 95% of the population was wiped out by, smallpox and measles. And I was just curious, like what happened there? Was there something else was there some other factor that played in the role? Like, did they come in and disrupt their food system first? And I never thought of salt, because that very well could be.
No, I raised the question in the book, what is the explanation for the rapid demise of the Native Americans from smallpox? And in many cases, it would hit a village and one or two village tribal members would survive, and that's all. And by the way, one of those was Squanto, who helped the Pilgrims. Yeah. He survived the smallpox. So I don't know the answer to this. One theory I have, just a theory, is so these people grew up on this wonderful diet. They had perfect eyesight, keen hearing, wonderful muscles, but they probably had a small pancreas or smaller digestive organs because they didn't, there was no stress on these organs growing up. Mm-hmm. And so, might have been something about the immune system that hadn't been stressed in a certain way because their diet was so perfect. Mm-hmm. And so in comes, first of all, the sugar, possibly a cutoff in salt. Then these microorganisms that they have never seen before, that their mothers were never exposed to, so they didn't get the immunity in their mother's milk. So it could have been all of these things at once that overwhelmed the part of their bodies that just hadn't been developed to deal with this. Mm-hmm. They probably had a small pancreas. And so sugar hit them like a baseball bat.
Yeah.
There's a quote in there from a woman in Australia. She was one of the last Aboriginal people to be brought out from the desert. Mm-hmm. And she talks about the shock of sugar on the tongue. And she said they would get bags of sugar and pour it down their throats. It was just, and so I'm asking myself, what is it about their physiology that made sugar so destructive? Mm-hmm. I mean, it just destroyed them, whereas our kids can handle a little sugar,
Yeah, I mean,
not good for them, but
I know kids that basically live off of it, and which, that's a really interesting thought. I mean, like another thing that I'm thinking of too is, a lot of the sacred foods that almost all the cultures have now, as I think about it, came from the ocean. Like whether the tribes lived right on the ocean and everything that they did was like all their food sources came from the ocean, or if they were like the Peruvians who lived high up in the Andes and they travel all the way down to the ocean to get fish eggs or fish roe, because they needed it for proper.
And it wasn't fish and chips that they were getting from. Yeah.
No.
Yeah,
it was the eggs.
Fish and chips.
Yeah.
It was fish egg and shark livers and the flesh behind the eye of the fish. Mm-hmm. It was all the organs, like the I think it was the people on the South Seas Island. They would catch a fish and they would take out the insides, but then they would put everything but the gallbladder back in and stuff the inside with all the organ meats. And that was how they ate the fish. So it was all the parts that we throw away. We think are yucky. And I talk about the yuck factor quite a bit because the foods that they ate had what we could consider a high yuck factor.
Yeah.
And so the real challenge for us is to get these foods back in our diet in an acceptable way. And one of the things I'd like to see, for example, in America, it is illegal to put organ meats in hot dogs.
Yeah, I was just going to say
this is a way to hide. And I would love to see this law change, that we could put liver in the organ meats in the hot dogs.
Yeah.
Another very important sacred food was blood.
Yeah.
And who eats blood in America? Well, in England and all of Europe, and even in Asia, they put the blood in the sausage, and it's delicious.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to start up that tradition here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, this is, we kind of arrive at this point where the very things that we need are actually illegal. And you mentioned raw milk.
Yeah. Like raw milk.
Yeah, the raw milk and the putting the organ meats in the back into our sausages or things like that, or after BSE or mad cow disease, it's illegal to sell any of the bones from an animal that's over 36 months old now.
Yes, right.
And so
you can't buy brain anymore.
Yeah, you can't
buy brain, which is wonderful food. Yeah,
definitely. And I mean, and just in the last, actually a couple of months ago, we were slapped with a basically cease and desist order because we were harvesting our animals on farm to try to minimize the stress that our animals had to go through before we harvested them, because we've noticed a big difference in the quality of the meat, and our customers also noticed that, and they asked us, and they basically forego their right for the state to protect them and to inspect their meat. And we had signed agreements and everything, but we still came in, and our farm was threatened with a $10,000 fine and or 2 years in prison because we were basically offering uninspected meat to our customers. And so I just, all these things, another question I ask myself is, why are our governments and educational institutions seem to be so antagonistic towards these diets?
In the case of meat's controlled by the mafia in this country and in our country. I don't know about Canada. And these agencies are just tools of the mafia. They may not realize this. Yeah. They're just taking the easy way, whatever that may be. But so this is a very entrenched power, and they are not going to give it up easily.
No. And that's where I really like your belief around this, the power of the individual, and these are individual choices that we all have to make. And as soon as we educate ourselves and start demanding for our food sovereignty again, that's where these few mafia type individuals or organizations, they can't stand a chance. And you've proven that in the States with the the milk mafia there was unbelievably powerful. And I watched some of these documentaries.
Well, and it still is.
Oh yeah.
It still is powerful. In fact, we're seeing very cruel consolidation today and so many dairy farmers going out of business. Yeah. But fortunately, we have this alternative. And what shocks me in a way is how few farmers take advantage of the ground that we've covered. And, we've made it possible in so many states, like in the state of Maryland, where we are, you can sell raw milk as pet food. And that's what we do on our farm. We sell it as dog and cat for dogs and cats. And I'm just surprised that so few farmers have taken the opportunity to do this, because we get $12 a gallon for our milk. And what are they getting? They're getting $1.30 a gallon.
Yeah. Well, and I know from my work with farmers up here in some of the they've bought into a lot of the propaganda themselves, but also so many of them are so indebted and
yes
the system. They to try to change one thing is just, it would break them. And which is again,
well, they paid so much money for the right to milk cows. Yeah. We don't have that system here. You have the quota system, and I think that's what's holding Canada back, because there's such entrenched opposition to anyone who wants to be out of the quota system. So it's kind of a different fight in Canada. Whereas in the States, we don't have a quota system. We definitely have more freedom in this regard
we've got our work cut out for you. The quota to milk one cow is about $20,000.
I know.
Just for the right to milk a single cow.
Yeah.
And some of these barns have hundreds of cows. It's just,
yeah. And so that's what they're banking on, that, well, and Canadian farmers actually get a better price for their milk than American farmers do.
yeah,
And so they can make a decent living. And then what they're betting on is when they retire, they can sell their cows and really be quite wealthy.
yeah.
So it's a lot better for farmers in the conventional milk system in Canada. And that's why it's going to be so much harder to change. Whereas here in the States, the situation is absolutely desperate. And it's actually much easier to change.
Yeah, you've got the farmers behind you. One of the other questions that I wanted to ask you was, in researching for this book, you talk about, you're basically bridging the gap of cross culture of all these different patterns, which you and Weston A. Price, the foundation, have distilled down into principles, which I think are absolutely brilliant. And I'm going to post a link to some of the work that you guys have done around those 11 principles of a healthy diet. But what other patterns did you notice that were similar across culture? Like sleeping patterns, breathing patterns, child rearing, anything else that you just piqued your interest? Maybe you didn't have time to do a bunch of research, but you just thought, that's fun.
I actually didn't look into that very much. One feature which I actually don't subscribe to is the swaddling of children. So I didn't write about the book, but the Native Americans swaddled their babies for 2 years. It was considered unlucky if the baby would put his foot in the ground until he was 2 years old. And the Europeans swaddled children. They swaddled them up and hung them on a hook so to keep them out of the way. And it was partially for their safety. The houses weren't as safe in those days. It was harder to keep children corralled and so forth. Now, I don't agree with swaddling. I think in primitive society, you may have had to do this. But again, I think it all comes back to the fact that now we're much more individualistic. It's part of our spiritual evolution. And a child needs more freedom from a very early age to express his will forces and so forth. I mean, I'm talking Rudolf Steiner now, but but that's something that I don't agree with. Many of the cultures had really severe puberty rites, initiation rites, involved tattooing or other horrible, painful things, and I don't agree with those things. So we mustn't be idealistic. We're focusing on the food here, and what were the elements in the food that made them so healthy. Doesn't mean we have to adopt all of the practices of primitive people.
No. So this is just to play devil's advocate here, and something that I've wanted myself. There's a lot of if you go down kind of the spiritual or the kind of esoteric type recommendations on diet, a lot of their theories that I've heard is that as our consciousness kind of shifts and we become more individualistic, as you say, and everything else, that our diet should also shift, and that we should switch to more of a high vibrational diet that consists of lighter foods and only fruits and vegetables and things like that. What would you say to recommend?
Well, I obviously you're not going to be healthy just eating fruits and vegetables. To me, the moral diet, the diet that is the righteous or right diet, is the diet that makes you healthy and allows you to work in the world. Because let's face it, we've got a lot of things to do here, a lot of things to clean up and fix, and we can't do that if we're not healthy. And I think a lot of people become quite depressed as they grow older. And in my opinion, the root of this depression is the realization that you are not accomplishing what you said you were going to accomplish before you came into embodiment. You had a little life plan. You made certain vows that you were going to do these things. And if you're too sick, you can't do them. No. If you don't have enough energy. So the right diet, the moral diet, is the diet that keeps you as healthy and energetic and full of energy as possible.
Well, and in terms of trying to find that right diet, one of the things that I also found interesting in your book is that the diets across the world, from Australia to the far north of the Polynesians, incredibly varied, and but they all shared similar those 11 principles that you talk about, and I just think that's so perfect and beautiful that no matter where we live in the world, like on which continent and even the microclimates and of those continents, and down to provincial and territorial areas, is that like the food can shift dramatically, but it's always perfect for the people that live there. And it's not to say that we shouldn't get food from other places and have more diversity, but when we read some of the stats, like there's 11 calories of food, or 11 calories of energy in every single calorie of food that we eat today. Taking that moral diet to the more of like an ethical question is that, do we have the right to and can our planet support everybody eating coconut oil and vitamins and these vegetarian vegan diets that supposedly developed and were really healthy in this area? Should we be eating those when it's minus 40 outside in Canada, and we're having to ship it and truck it, and it was picked when it was still green, so there's still lectins in the plant, and what are your thoughts on kind of the energy implications of?
Well, in the 1700s and 1800s, first of all, it was much colder then.
Yeah,
it's called the Little Ice Age. Before that, it had actually been much warmer. We had the medieval warming period, and you had vineyards in Denmark and dairy farms in Greenland. And then it got really cold. And what you had in Europe was an energy crisis because they'd run out of wood, and they didn't have a way to heat and keep warm. And this is what created so much unrest that made people pick up and leave and go to America. When they came to America, they had wood, and Europeans were very critical of how wasteful Americans were. They'd have a wood fire in every fireplace in their house. Well, they just had lots of wood. But the point is that if we hadn't had an energy revolution, first coal and then oil and gas, this planet could not support many people because we'd be out of wood. We would definitely be out of a way to warm ourselves. So I think we need to look at both sides of this. We don't want to be wasteful, and a lot of modern agriculture is very wasteful. Growing corn to put it in cows when you could just as easily feed them grass. To me, that's very wasteful. But at the same time, I think we need to be grateful also. Yes, absolutely. When I go into I say supermarket, but I shop at our little health food store and see the display of fruits and vegetables, I almost get tears in my eyes. It's a miracle. I mean, nobody else in the world at any time had that abundance and that variety and choice coming from all over the world. The world has gotten really small because of these technologies. So one of the things I say to people is take half of your food budget and spend it locally, buy directly from farmers. And the other half of your budget, celebrate how small the world has become and this miracle that you can have rice and pineapple and, lettuce. You have lettuce at any time of the year. So I think we shouldn't be chastising ourselves for this. It's a miracle, and it's a wonderful miracle. And just make sure you put the right things on those vegetables and on your rice, and cook your rice the right way and everything. Yeah.
Excellent.
And make sure you put salt on the vegetables and butter, and doing your part.
There's a lot of paradigms that I held that were shaken while reading this book, and one of them was one that I found particularly interesting, was that you mentioned this several times in, when Europeans first got here, they described the landscape and how it seemed like a park-like setting, or another quote was how it had appeared that every inch of the land had been swept, and
Yes.
tide eating.
Land.
And then you have another line that says that when a lot of indigenous cultures, their word for wilderness, or like our version of that word, which for us has very positive connotations in, healthy, vibrant, freedom, and just, it's like wilderness is out there, and the human environment is over here. For the indigenous people, wilderness had a negative connotation, and it meant land that was uncared for. And
dirty land, they called it
dirty land.
Yes.
That really hit home for me, because of just the pervasive myth that I see so much in our culture today, particularly in the young people, is that they feel guilty for being alive, and
yes,
they honestly feel that the world would be better off if we all died, or we went to Mars, and we just left nature to be wild, so that we couldn't wreck it anymore. I just like to, what are your thoughts on the youth today that every morning they have to get up and feel guilty for being alive?
Yeah, that's such a shame. Well, first of all, if they had bacon and eggs for breakfast, they wouldn't feel so guilty. But Steiner said that not only is mankind fallen, and the German word is not fallen. The German word is separated. And I think fallen is the wrong word. We're separated. We're separated from the spiritual world. But also nature is fallen or separated. And it is our job to manage nature, to make it beautiful, to make it abundant, to make it, clean. And that's our job. And the Aboriginal peoples felt that very strongly. That was their purpose in life, was to manage the landscape, often with smoky fires, creating a lot of pollution. So I think it's really a shame that this environmental movement has made everybody feel guilty and unworthy.
Yeah.
Because we're here to manage things. I'll just give you an example. When we bought our farm, they'd been taking tractors and cutting hay for years. Mm-hmm. And our fields were mostly thistles. We had no topsoil, no earthworms, thistles. Now we've been doing managed grazing. We've been doing this intelligent input. Mm-hmm. We use the tractor to take the water tank to the cows and, that kind of thing. We still use tractor, but we're not cutting all the time. We're not harvesting. And over the last 4 or 5 years, the thistles have gone away, and we have this beautiful, lush grass. So it just requires this intelligent, caring input from healthy, caring people. And then you have beauty and abundance, and this is what nature wants. Paul said in the Bible, all of nature is groaning and waiting in anticipation for us to do this. So let's get going,
Let's get going. There's lots of work to do, and it all starts with a healthy breakfast. Yeah. That's perfect.
Yes, right. Perfect.
Well, I'll end there, Sally. That's been an hour, and again, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to chat with me today, and also for just the incredible work that you and your organization has done for me personally, but I know so many people here in Alberta that are in part are have come back to the land because of the insights that you've helped them have, and it's really profound. It's such important work, and I know it's not easy to be a heretic in such a dogmatic culture, and so I just want to thank you for that.
So thank you. And
go ahead.
Yes. I was just going to say, the website of the Weston A. Price Foundation is westonaprice.org. Yep. We have a beautiful new website. It just sparkles. I think it's lovely. And we have a great podcast. We have we have videos on the website. Lots of articles, in-depth articles. We like to make this information available in as many formats as possible.
Yeah.
Some people like to listen, some people like to read. So, please have a look at the website.
And I really like how everything is so well referenced, and you guys are quoting scientific articles, and you're even having active debates or conversations around other articles, and trying to poke holes in other people's theories, and like you're making it very accessible, but you're also coming at a very high level, working with other doctors, and it's just incredible work that you guys have done. And so I'm going to have links to the Weston A Price organization, and a bunch of your other stuff, your blog as well. I highly recommend signing up for the Weston A Price newsletter. There's some great information on there.
Being a member, yeah.
And also
then you get
being a member. Which another question I wanted to ask. Go ahead.
Just quickly, if you give us your email, we like to have your email. Mm-hmm. Then you get 7 really simple, colorful emails about our principles.
Yeah.
So it's a real good way. Mm-hmm.
It is.
And then we hope you'll become a member and receive the journal.
Absolutely. And so, like, just for my own interest sake, and I'm sure for others, how many members do you have worldwide now?
We have about 12,000 members.
Oh my!
We have a much bigger email list. Our podcast has had way over 1 million downloads, and we have about 500 chapters worldwide, local chapters.
Amazing. Yeah, there's 2 right here. There's 2 right here in Alberta. There's 3.
Oh, good.
3 in Alberta. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Excellent. Again, thank you so much. And it's very exciting. We live in an incredibly exciting time. And as you said, we should all be grateful for the incredible abundance that we have. But there's also, we got work to do.
Yeah. Gratitude, not guilt, right?
That's right. That's right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks so much, Sally.
So when you see those teeth marks in the butter, you should feel gratitude, not guilty. All right, thanks for having me. And we're trying to make plans for Alberta. So, and I have, as you know, I have